Hello, and welcome to the culmination of the Royal Society of Literature's 200th birthday celebrations. I'm Molly Rosenberg, Director of the RSL, and it is my great privilege to be marking this historic day for our society by introducing our chair, Lisa Appignanesi, at the end of her time leading the RSL's Governing Council. Lisa will be welcoming the RSL's incoming chair with a discussion of what it means to be turning 200 and what the next years have in store for the society. After we hear from Lisa, I'm thrilled that we'll have our president, Professor Dame Marina Warner, to give an address for our bicentenary. Today marks the beginning of RSL 200, a 5-year festival celebrating key moments in the bicentenaries of our founding years, between the Society's beginning in 1820 and receiving our Royal Charter and Roll Book in 1825. It has been such a pleasure to share today with so many great writers and supporters of literature, who we've welcomed as honorary fellows, vice presidents, and companions of literature. You can find more on all of these with videos across our social media and at our website, rsliterature.org. The RSL was founded for the advancement of literature, and in all our work for and with readers and writers, we hope to demonstrate that literature matters, that it shapes society, and that it can change an individual life. A great force for the importance of literature in our lives is the RSL's chair, Lisa Appignanesi. Lisa has led the RSL for 4 years, bringing to life new programmes and initiatives for the Society, some of which you'll have seen today. We've been fortunate to have the great benefit of Lisa's past experience as chair of the Freud Museum, president of English Pen, and deputy director of London's Institute of Contemporary Arts. But Lisa is first and foremost a writer, the author of novels, memoir, and non-fiction. From Mad, Bad and Sad, a history of women and the mind doctors from 1800 to the present, and Everyday Madness on grief, anger, loss, and love. Her energy and passion for literature have guided our society, led by writers, to our 200th birthday. It is with great gratitude that I introduce Lisa now, for her in turn to introduce and welcome the RSL's next chair, whose term will begin in January 2021.
Thank you so much, Molly. It's been a delight to work with you. But now it's my very, very great pleasure, indeed I'm thrilled to be doing this, to welcome Daldred Nagra, prize-winning poet, as the new chair of the Royal Society of Literature. Daldred has been the poet in residence for BBC Radio 4. He's a lecturer in poetry at Brunel, has judged many, many prizes, including the National Poetry Competition, and he's read his work across the country in schools and academies. More important than all of that, Daldred is the author of the most extraordinary volumes of poetry. First of all, I don't know if I'm going to say this with the right inflection. Look, we have Coming to Dover in 2007, which enriches the English language with its extraordinary use of the inflections of Punjabi Punglish, as it's known. He's also written Tipu Sultan's incredible White Man Eating Tiger toy machine, which for me, because I'm so old, has a certain resonance. I grew up with Tom Wolfe, of course, and his savage satires. He's also done what I think is the beginning of a long-term project to introduce into contemporary English the great classics of Indian literature and mythology, the Ramayana, which he did in 2013, and I believe there's a Mahabharata to come. And his most recent volume of poetry, British Museum 2017, which is reflective and really altogether extraordinary. Daldred, so welcome as the new chair of the Royal Society of Literature. I want everyone to know a little bit more about you, and I thought perhaps we could start by talking about where you grew up and how it felt to be you, because how it feels to be you is, of course, one of the subjects of the language that you use and the poetry that you have written.
Thank you, Lisa, for passing over to me. You've done an incredible job over the past 4 or so years, and I look forward to continuing the amazing work you've done. And this is the greatest honour of my professional life, to be the chair of the Royal Society of Literature and the dedicated work that awaits us. So it's a really exciting opportunity for me. And so, yeah, to go back to the question about my own background, I guess my parents came from northern India, from Punjab, in the late 1950s. So I was born and grew up in West London, a couple of miles away from Heathrow Airport, but just on the right side. We didn't have the runway above our house, so luckily we survived that. I just went to the local primary and secondary state schools, and we just had that very, very ordinary education, really. I was expected at 16 to go and get a job at probably the airport or one of the factories around there. And to that extent, we didn't study O-levels, we studied the CSEs. I'm sure you remember or have heard of them, Lisa. Like you got CSE 1 that was equivalent to grade C at O-level, but I'm not sure if it really was. So we had that sort of background, and my parents bought a shop in Sheffield when I was 16. So we lived in Sheffield for nearly 15 years. So I then went and did evening classes at A-levels from the age of about 18, and decided to go to university when I was 21 to study English, which of course was a strange decision as far as my parents were concerned, because I spoke English, so why would I want to study English? And they were very keen for me to run a post office or a corner shop, and they want to get me arranged marriage and settle down. And there I was, leaving Sheffield to move to London again, back to London. So I guess that's my sort of background. There weren't any books at home. My mum wasn't educated at all. She never went to school in the village. And my dad had a bit of education. He was a wrestler. So I come from that very sporty background. So I think they're all a bit surprised, really, why I would go into poetry in particular. Read book. Why do I read books? It's bad for your eyes. Why do you end up writing poetry? What is that sort of like sort of in India? I guess my village background, the perception is almost gambling and drinking and baying at the moon with your kind of love poetry. So there's a slight kind of insanity to it.
Whereas you actually had some English, I think, when you started. I mean, you
well, when I went to school, I would have had English. Yeah, at home we only spoke Punjabi. So I do remember sort of watching Tom and Jerry and some other cartoons, and when a character spoke, I didn't know what they were saying, and those sort of things. Yeah.
So did you feel that existence of the various languages in the home as an enrichment, or initially as a conflict?
Oh no, I think it was. Well, we weren't expected to speak English, and no one spoke English at home, so it wasn't really a language as such. We were just aware of it from television. So they were sort of discrete worlds in a way, and they came together when I went to school, and I was quite happy watching Bollywood films, and watching Hollywood films, listening to rock music and the Bollywood songs and musicals. So yeah, there's a natural integration. And one of my great regrets is I didn't read when I was growing up. I wasn't really exposed to reading. I used to look at sort of books, novels, and think, how does somebody read all those lines, all those pages? I didn't have the stamina for it. I didn't understand it. I was really sort of 18, 19 when I consciously started reading, and my life really changed at that point. Sort of came across a book of poems by William Blake in the bookshop, and bought that, and that was completely life-changing after that. And I've been reading ever since. So I was about 19 then, so I was getting on in the world. And then I did sort of English at sixth form, A-level, and just loved reading Shakespeare, the Romantics, and I've been sort of reading that classic literature ever since. I just really enjoy it.
That's wonderful. And what always strikes me about people who actually write poetry is that they are a very different species. I mean, I grew up, not because my parents read, but because I read reading fiction, which is, what dutiful little girls do and how they shape themselves. But in any case, there's a real sense that there's a long line and a long breath, whereas poetry always seems to me almost like a philosophical point that you sit there with a language, let it flood through you, but at the same time you're concentrating in a very, very different way than the kind of discursive way in which one reads novels. And so I wonder why you felt drawn to that particular kind of form. What was it about William Blake? Was it the city? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right. It probably was the city partly, and I used to listen to a lot of rock music. So when I read something like London, that poem, it felt like a punk song to me. Something that the Clash or the Jam might have written, and it had that sort of power, that authority over landscape, and the idea of language being held in a rhythm, in time, in motion. that's something quite fantastic, which novel functions very differently. As you said, it's a great big text, whereas a poem over 20 or 30 lines, you're kind of really held.
So song, rather than huge wads of text. But I think where there's a similarity between us is when I read, for example, Look, We Have Come Into Dover, I get a very, very strong sense of voice and individual character. I mean, it's as if you are taking on the voice of others. And when I used to write fiction, I don't at the moment, but nonetheless, there's always voice to whatever kind of writing you're doing. And that strikes me as something which moves from your work, your poetry, into the kind of work that I might do.
Yeah, no, I think we're both doing something very similar, in obviously very different ways, but giving voice to people who maybe don't have a voice or whose voice has been neglected. And that's been important in your work, isn't it, in non-fiction work? And that feels very important to me in my own poetry. So I wouldn't say I'm a very autobiographical poet in the literal sense, but autobiographical in the sense of writing about the community, but being very aware of the style and play of poetry and how the whole thing is just a wonderful medley of experience, whether it be of language, of rhythm, and different styles. And I'm sure you kind of connect with that on a profound level completely.
Absolutely. But let's talk a little bit about the Royal Society and what our hopes and visions of it are and what in fact it does. I mean, 200 years, it's very weighty history and an institution that's kind of grown up and changed remarkably in that time. And I mean, what did you think about the Royal Society before you were a fellow?
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't say, but my perception of it was, I'm sure it's going to be some stuffy, nostalgic institution, when I was made a fellow about 4 years ago. And I mean, having served on the council now for 3 years, and you've been chair, and Marina's been president that time, I've been really fascinated at how you work these double timescapes so fluently. Thinking about what was successful in the past, what issues need to be addressed that weren't addressed then, and how we move forward. I don't. How do you feel about your time as chair and dealing with the push and pull?
Well, I mean, what you say is absolutely right. Partially because I'm a historian, I'm very interested in the way in which these learned societies came into being and what they represent. And when I arrived, I really did feel that the RSL. I'm a very kind of active person. I want things to happen. I want things to change. And it seemed to me that it was at a moment where this a little bit had been done in that direction, but that we needed a far greater sense of openness to the world that we were in, and also a kind of engagement, because I think writers at different points in history have either gone into their tower or they felt they needed to, and the public wanted them to somehow be voices out there in the public sphere as well as in the inner one. And it seemed to me that the RSL as an institution of writers could do a great deal in that direction. And so we introduced various programs which would allow literature to stand up in the public sphere. I mean, I think, Dalloway Day is one of them, to have in London and indeed in Britain the celebration of Virginia Woolf in the way that Joyce is celebrated in Dublin and in Ireland seemed to me to be a good thing, and to have a marker in the calendar. We introduced Literature Matters, which of course in its very title, I think it's one of my inspirational moments that came from Obama, in fact. Seemed to me to say, yes, come on, let's think about what it is that really matters to writers about literature. And not only writers who are, people we consider to be literary, like poets like you, but also writers who have philosophical intentions, and critics, and the whole range of writing, novelists. Everybody has a view on what it is that matters to them, because they've been shaped by literature, but also how literature matters in the world. So that was another kind of program that we introduced. And of course, to bring new life into the RSL, we needed to reduce the age. So 40 under 40 came into being, and we brought in 40 new fellows under the age of 40. And that openness, that sense that this institution needs new life, new thought, was extremely important to me. And I hope that's going to go on.
I'm probably aware that when I went to university and sometime after that, my idea of excellence was probably quite narrow, because I've been educated in the white canon only, and a very certain canon, as you said, even the novel. By the time I went to university, the novel was revered, but there was a time when it wasn't. So it's really interesting to remember that. And then with the 40 under 40, you had to really think about what is excellence. And of course, one of the most exciting things for me about the Royal Society of Literature, one of the most inspirational things, is that we don't have a definition of excellence, which I think is incredible. And that's not for any mischief here, to undermine things. It's just that we can't, for example, we can't just judge literature by, say, T.S. Eliot. You and I, Lisa, would probably agree that there's excellence there in The Wasteland, the Four Quartets, Prufrock. But we wouldn't use the same criteria for measuring excellence in Eliot, say, as in measuring someone like John Cooper Clarke, whose excellence probably would be performing on a Friday night in a live venue with people who've had a few drinks. So the excellence there is of a very different kind of nature.
We all know when we see it. We all know when we read it or hear it in one way or another. And we know that there's excellence in many different ways. It's not a word I like to use. I mean, I like things to be alive. I like them to be vivid or vibrant or stretch my mind or my feelings. But the word excellence is a strange word because it makes you think there is only craft. And craft always means one form of craft. I've grown up with artists and worked with artists and writers who work in many, many different ways, but somehow it always enriches, it's always vibrant, it's always vivid, and that to me is what excellence is.
No, I completely agree. Actually, when you talk about it like that, excellence does feel slightly aloof almost. There's this certain sort of measure, but we have it in the Society of Literature as one of our criteria. And as you say, especially as literature is opening up and we have more voices, we have more forms. And I think even my tiny little world of poetry, you have, I would say you have social media poetry, you have performance poetry, you have kind of a more familiar page poetry, and also you have this avant-garde. And in a sense, they're all very different, and they require different ways of saying they're good or not good.
We all do that. There's always a sense that there's a richness there, which is excellence, whether it's the graphic novel or the new poem or the pop song, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. There's ongoing diversification in line with new sensibility, each generation finding each generation finding its own way to articulate itself. Literature has to constantly change. It just has to change, doesn't it?
And there are always new generations of readers. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. The RSL is going into its Bicentenary Celebrations. We were going to do them all in 1 year, and now they're going over 5 years, which I think is absolutely great. Can I ask you what it is that you're actually looking forward to for the RSL in your term of office?
Sure. Well, I think first I might mention about the Booker winner a few days ago, Douglas Stewart, and how he was writing about coming from working class Glaswegian backgrounds, we all now know. But the fact that it took him over 30 rejections before he was accepted by a publisher reminds me again of, if you're writing about kind of certain communities or marginalised groups, you don't naturally have good access to the world of literature to get publication. So with that, the RSL Open programme, I'm really excited about, because we're going to pick 60 fellows from diverse backgrounds who are traditionally underrepresented in the world of literature, just to show up the necessity for this. So, looking at LGBTQI+, people from disabled background, people from working class background, BAME, and people who live and work outside London who may find it hard to get published. So we're going to pick the very best of the best from this group. So I'm really excited about that. We've got a committee including Colin Toybin and Bernardine Evaristo. Really excited about our project of international writers, how we're going to connect with great writers abroad around the world to say that we are part of the community. We know Britain is shrinking into itself ever so slightly, but we want to connect with you. And I think it's really important for the Royal Society of Literature to speak for itself and speak to authors around the world and be part of a global network.
If you're like you and me, we always want to open things up to the fresh and the new and the people who stretch things in important ways. I think the Royal Society is a really wonderful institution because of the way in which the fellowship enriches everything that is actually done as programme, that is done as outreach, that is done as education. Thank you so much, Daldred. That was a real pleasure. And I wish you very, very good luck in your tenure as the new chair of the Royal Society of Literature. I know it's going to be a remarkable few years, what with the great celebrations of the Bicentenary and all the things that have already been put in place by council and staff. And I wish you the very, very best.
And thank you, Lisa. And I hope you won't go too far, because I'll be turning to you for advice over our many exciting projects, several of which you obviously have initiated or thought of yourself. So thank you and all the best.
Thank you, Lisa and Daldred. It's been a pleasure working with both of you over these last years, and I know that we can look forward to a very bright future. At the RSL, we celebrate excellence in literature from the great breadth of voices at work today. And one of our great voices, our president, is Marina Warner. Her works span novels, short stories, history and myth. Among the many accolades she has received, Marina is a distinguished fellow of All Souls College, Oxford, and was made DBE in 2015. She became the RSL's president in 2017. I am so pleased to welcome Marina to close today's celebrations with an address for our 200th birthday.
Thank you, Molly. Greetings to the Presidents Emeriti, the Vice Presidents, Officers, Fellows, members, friends and staff of the Royal Society of Literature. A month or so ago, a parcel I'd sent a prisoner came back with a name scrawled out in red and refused written in caps and circled. The first book I'd sent had got through, but this second attempt had failed, no reason given. I put in a copy of The 1001 Nights, full of justice-obsessed and fate-haunted tales, told by a woman at night to save her life. With several writers and fellows of the RSL, I remember protesting in Whitehall against Chris Grading's decision to stop prisoners having books. This was one of the very few causes which our side won. Prison reading groups are now flourishing in more than 40 prisons. So the rejection of my parcel was highly unusual. In this particular case, a book had been seen as an undeserved solace, even a reprieve of punishment. The isolation brought about by the virus doesn't exactly match the state of our current prison facilities, but the rejected book is a sharp reminder of the importance of literature, most particularly now. Some writer friends have told me that they've been loving the end of the hurly-burly, and that life under COVID-19 brings the sort of quiet time that's usually sought from bursaries, sabbaticals, and retreats. Manuscripts of books, many long delayed, are cascading into agents' and editors' in trays. But many other writers, and I am with them, find that it's bewilderingly easy to lose track of time altogether, and anxiety about the future is making it hard to concentrate. During the monotony of confinement, the days seem to speed past like greased lightning. Yet at the same time, these long months have also felt jammed, as if someone has again shot the albatross and we're becalmed on the accursed ship. Day after day, we stuck, nor breath nor motion, as idle as a painted ship upon a painted ocean. Many of us are suffering cancellations, delays, closures, playwrights especially. Parties, like the RSL's own jolly annual gathering, have not happened. Book launches online reach far and wide, but they don't feel like real celebrations. Festivals and events, those opportunities to find readers and sell books, won't be taking place for a while. Meanwhile, loneliness is spreading with the disease. In these circumstances, the life of the mind, the horizons opened by imagination have never been a more valuable resource for survival, a defense against depression and stagnation, a principal element in the common good, a right everyone should enjoy, a lifeline. Iris Murdoch put it ringingly. Art, she wrote, is informative and entertaining. It condenses and clarifies the world. This intense showing, this bearing witness, is detested by tyrants. Art illuminates accident and contingency and the general muddle of life, to enable us to survey complex or horrible things which would otherwise appall us. It creates an authoritative public human world, a treasury of past experience. It preserves the past. It calms and invigorates. To this magnificent passage, I would add that in times like these, books, stories, play scripts, poems are also company. Through them we meet other minds. Also, even in social distancing, reading a work a friend has recommended, talking with them later, connections grow. A society of fellows and members like the RSL can help keep this common ground alive and growing. Throughout the time of the pandemic, the Society has astonishingly managed to remain productive and solvent. This is due to your participation online in events and activities. And I want to acknowledge the attentiveness, thought, and guidance of all the members of Council, steered by its dynamic and selfless chair, Lisa Appignanesi. And I also want to pay tribute here to the indefatigable work of the team in the office, led by Molly Rosenberg. Tom Stoppard, in conversation with Hermione Lee, his biographer, recently said something wonderfully astute. Fiction, he said, is unrebuttable in a way that history isn't. This is a particular feature of imaginary stories that has struck me forcefully during these past months of coronavirus. The events they unfold will unfold that way and no other. Narrative time is foreclosed in a way that living in reality can never be. The encounter with the story does not leave the future unknown, and this, to me at least, has been a profound source of the solace, pleasure, and reassurance of reading literature recently. You can revisit a classic novel with a fresh critical approach and evaluate it from the point of view of various ideologies, which will change its significance. But you can't make Lizzie Bennet refuse to marry Darcy, unless you are purposefully revisiting a classic to turn it upside down. And many writers and role-playing games are setting out to do exactly that, of course. But I hope you do see what I mean. The horizons of literature are not filled with unknowable contingencies. And in a time like ours, this narrative stability, this security, even when the story is devastatingly tragic, builds a safe place against impending precarity and danger. I've found it possible to live through COVID so far, with books as company, giving each day a different character, changing the conversation and the air quality, as if a breeze had risen and released the accursed ship from the doldrums and set it moving again. You've now heard the new Chair of Council is the poet, Daldred Nagra. Let's hope the vaccine comes and comes soon, that the world steadies itself, and that next year we'll gather together in person and celebrate.
Thank you, Marina, for bringing our day to a close. Thank you too to everyone watching, our members, fellows and subscribers for all your support, and to ALCS for making our 200th birthday celebrations possible. You can continue to join in on social media following our hashtag RSL200, or you can follow all the news on our website. Thank you for celebrating our birthday with us, and I hope to see you soon.